The Earthbreaker, Soul Taker, Bane of all things. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I am going to be discussing Bane of All Things by Valiquette. And this one I read as an eARC that I got through NetGalley. This one that sounded pretty interesting, and so I was excited to get a read into for this. This review will be spoiler-free because the book is not quite out yet. I will try to make sure to have a link to where you can purchase the book if you do want to get it as well. It's going, I think it's still going to be all places, but it's going through this publisher called Inkshares, which I learned about from reading about this book, where it sounds like you submit stuff through them, and then they collect pre-orders, and then if you get enough pre-orders, they'll publish the book. So that's kind of interesting. So I'll check to see, I don't know if you have to go through them or if it's other places. But anyway, let's get into talking about the book. So the kind of base plot, and it's a little hard to break down because there's a lot of history that we're given at the beginning of this book and kind of throughout as well. But the base plot is hundreds of years ago, there was this massive war, and it involved the gods and other countries. The pretty wide world is built pretty quickly. And what ended up happening basically is two of the gods were warring, and one of the gods helped create a sword that essentially would be powerful enough to kill the other god, and or the son of the other god, Zang, who is kind of like a godling basically. So the sword being the bane of all things is kind of where we go there. With it, and so it does have a name as well, but that's kind of the base plot. And so now in the current time there's a lot of plots going on where the evil side is trying to rise up Zang, who's the son of the great deceiver, and kind of take back over. There's an empire far to the east where the followers of that god are still kind of in power. In the world outside of that, over in the west, is following a somewhat familiar looking, it's called the Holy Clerisy. The difference being that what had happened is when basically the kind of the founder of this, it was founded on virtues and not actually worshiping gods, because the founder has stated that the gods were all dead. Not only were like the two big gods, there were also the four gods, which were gods of the land. As you can see, I've been talking a bit, and there's kind of a lot to unpack here. But the base plot is following our two characters, Rin and Jocelyn, as they kind of get thrown into the mix and unwittingly are pulled into the action and basically the war between the greater forces of evil. So there's a lot here, and a lot of it's very interesting. The thing I do have to know, as I've kind of already alluded to, you definitely get a bit of an info dump at the beginning, and more knowing than that, because that was kind of interesting. It gave a brief history of some of the wars, some of the things that had been going on. You get these, and they just seem really out of place. And I don't know if this is something that will be explained later on, but it certainly is not in the first book. But you get these kind of like interlude passages where somebody is like explaining to a child, and she's like a seer or something, explaining to a child all of these different, I don't know if it's actually a child, they call them child, but that could just be like one of those things, but explaining all the different other nuances of the gods and what they really want. And it's completely an info dump, and that's really all it is. It doesn't really serve a lot of purpose for the plot otherwise, because most of the things that, if they're relevant, they get brought up in different ways. So that was kind of annoying, and I didn't really care for that. I think really what it came down to is this is a debut novel, and the author had a ton he wanted you to know, and so I'm looking at this as a setup book, especially with everything that happened. It really seems like the setup is done and it'll be ready to go. This is the start of a series, and so I didn't like dock it too much in my head as I was reading it, even though info dumps obviously aren't the best, but because it was trying to get all of this going and really tell a big story. With that, you do get quite a lot, like I said, set up, and it's very action-packed, and I really enjoyed a lot of the scenes where they were just kind of like running off and like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and there were some great fights as well. Some great creatures and all of the different pieces drawn in. The amount of world building done is very it's very well done, and it's very successful because there's so much that's put in. There are times where it feels like the author's just trying to cram a little bit too much into this book, though. This wasn't a short book. It wasn't an overly long book. It was like 500 pages or so. I think I read it on Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy, but I think it was around 500 pages. And there was probably, with everything that happened, easily enough for 2 slower paced books. Is probably what I would say. The plot at the very beginning, I felt like we could have spent a lot more time there, and it wouldn't have been boring. It wasn't necessarily bad to be done with it, but the book kind of starts with both of these main characters. They're on their way to a place called the Claw, which is kind of like part temple, part military outpost. And so he's going because basically charges against him as an officer of the clerisy. He's a paladin, and he's being sent there for what he did to serve there. And basically, it's you're expected, you serve there for a certain number of years, and you're expected to probably not survive because they're fighting against these creatures that are over there. And she's going because she's accused of being a witch, basically, and so is going to live out her days in the convent that's also there. There was a lot, I felt like, that could have been explored there that, honestly, I was interested to know more. But that's kind of the start. Instead, we move and we up the ante quite a lot, which is really not a bad thing. Like I said, this was a very fast-paced book. And so I'm always going to be the guy, though, that complains, like, we could have spent more time on this, or I could have used some more page counts. But the book really, really was quite fast-paced, and so that's nice and refreshing sometimes. And those people who like the world building and maybe are okay with a little bit of the dump so that we don't have to spend so much more time, if you like fast-paced, kind of gritty, action-packed books, this is one I think you would enjoy, because it really does all those things well. Now, the other thing I do have to mention, and this isn't like a huge negative, but there are some things of the plot that are more original than others, but there are a lot of things that are not the most original. So the first of all is a sentient sword that feeds on the life force around it in order to work, which immediately to me harkens to Nightblood from Warbreaker, and just kind of like, I'm like, okay, I'm okay with this. It was a little bit different, but it's also like the sword has a compulsion to destroy what it sees as evil, basically, and so it's just kind of like, I really could not help but compare that. There are also just part of the setup, basically, where the sword was used to, like, seal the spirit of Zhang, the big bad, in the first book. And some of the other parallels there really did remind me of some parts from Wheel of Time. Just kind of the good, evil gods coming in. That, too, is not the most original either. But what it does do is actually create... Leo Valiquette has created lots of other types of creatures. There's the Grenlick, there's all kinds of stuff that's revealed later, and set up quite a lot to show that the world really is more diverse. There's all kinds of different creatures, there's demons, there's people of all sorts as well. And so there was a lot in there that's new as well, but it seems like he definitely leaned pretty heavily on other things that he took inspiration from, like some of the things I mentioned, and probably many, many others. Some of that, of course, can be unintentional. I'm not saying at all that he ripped off any of those things. It just seemed to me like some heavy inspiration was taken from those things. I think that seems more common in a debut for a lot of authors I've just seen as I've read debuts, where they want to start kind of with something people know and are familiar with and then build off of it. And so from the ending, I really do expect that to be where this went. I was pretty interested in some of the characters, and there was more of a side character who it sounds like is going to get a bigger role in the second book that I was really interested in, because even without spending a lot of time with them, I just liked where their character was going and what they were being set up for. So this is one I definitely would look out. It's not like a must-read for me, but I'll definitely look out for when the second book comes, because this was an enjoyable book. It definitely wasn't perfect, and had some flaws, but it was overall a very enjoyable book that just was nice and quick to get through for a 500-page book. I guess I can't say that quick, but if it's under 600 pages and it's fantasy, it's a short book. That's just kind of the way that it is. Is what I've gone to say. If it's under 600 pages, that probably counts as being short. But anyway, like I said, just the world, a lot of the grip. There's definitely a lot of two, and at some points I felt like it leaned a little too heavy on all of the the damaged people coming together and identifying with each other for the different reasons. But it's done. It's kind of like it's half found family trope, half just, oh, we all have this thing in our past. It's pretty recurring, and if it wasn't like every single character, I think it'd be a little bit different. Once again, a lot of the flaws didn't annoy me that much because they weren't super egregious in my mind. So even with that too, it did give you some moments with the characters. Some of it you could kind of figure out. And it also does play pretty hard into the clerisy being very corrupt. And that's also, once again, not the most original thing. Your big religious organization that has some corruption in it. But even some of the viewpoints we get from there and looking at it make it seem that it's a bit different than things that we've seen. Like I said, kind of the whole base point where it's like a religious order, but it's mandated that the gods are dead. Like if you worship a god, any god, that's heresy. And so that's definitely different with the setup of it being based on just like virtues that were put forth by kind of the founder of that religion. And there's a lot that's delved in there too as well. So like I said, really this feels like that book it's setting things up to get going, but at the same time, a crazy amount happens in this book. As I got further and further in, I kept wondering, I'm like, where are they going with this? Because it feels like it's building up like it's a standalone, even though it's not. This is the start of a series, so I think that's kind of the balance you get. There's a lot of familiar things, there's some info dumps, and there's some setup, but so much happens with quite a lot of action that it just moves the story forward very, very quickly. And so to get ready for everything else to come. So I think that's a trade-off you have. The last kind of partial, I guess, complaint, there definitely, there was a lot of times where they just basically say, okay, we're going to do this, and then they're just there and already prepared and come up with everything. That's one of those things that I feel like sometimes new authors will rely on a little too heavily, where they don't know how to explain everything that's happening, so they just kind of be like, oh, and they needed to go do this thing, so then here they are now, and they've already set up this master plan somehow. That's something that I'm not a huge fan of, because it just makes a lot of it seem like plot conveniences, like we need them to do this, so we're just going to say that they figured out how. There's still, of course, the things that go wrong, but there was quite a lot of that where just we need to be somewhere, so suddenly we're just going to jump forward in time if need be to get all that done. So that would be the thing I would look to see the author, hopefully, now that they have the first book out, go through and try to improve on just some of those things that were either a little bit inconsistent with how the plot's moving forward, go into a little bit more depth on things, but also hopefully, like I said, I think a lot more of it was just he was trying to cram as much as he could in to this first book to get things going. So I'm giving the author and the series the benefit of the doubt that it was intentional, and hopefully things will expand a little bit more with less info dumps, but expand a little bit more as we keep going with the story, because the story seems like it's going to be getting pretty big scale, once again, based on how this one ends, because so much happens in the first book that you really wouldn't expect the first book to have gotten to from the start of it. So those are really my thoughts on Bane of All Things by Leo Valiquette. I enjoyed this book. This, like I said, it wasn't like a must-read for me. I think I gave a 3.5, which is halfway between I liked this and I really liked this for me. Like I said, it's a debut. There were some issues, but honestly, overall, I thought this was an enjoyable book, and very fast-paced and just action-heavy, which is very different from some of the other things that I've been reading, so it was nice in there. And I think anybody who likes a bit more fast-paced and is totally fine with being like, I'm not going to explain everything, we're just going to go do it. Because I know some people probably prefer that versus me, that I'm okay with all of the explanation for the most part. I think that's really who this is for. There's definitely a lot to like here and a lot to enjoy. So those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for a link to the Wizardly Do It Discord. If you want to chat this book, other books, anything else really at all, we always have a ton of fun there, a lot of discussion going on, buddy reads, everything, you name it. We'd love to have you if you would like to join. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.